this issue of psychedelic safety, I want to explore the danger of resensitizing ourselves as individuals in a way that may need support and integration in a culture that is not equipped to deliver that as a whole. And as a way of giving a little bit of context to this, if we take a movie like The Emerald Forest, or we take a culture, I enjoyed the book Secrets of the Talking Jaguar by Martin Prechtel, or Beneficio's Roses. Forgive me if the titles are a little off. But what you find in these cultures is a moist sensuality with emotion and with the body. Environments that are very attuned to the rhythms of the body and consciousness, that are predisposed to flow, to receptivity, to responsiveness, to learning. And in that way, these are more feminine culture. If you look at the polarity between masculine energy and feminine energy, technically, and step out of the gender stereotypes, you find that every energy exists as a polarity: assertiveness and receptivity, speaking, listening, opening, closing, focusing, get to the point, and diffuse awareness. Now, the healthiest cultures have an equal balance of emphasis on listening and emphasis on speaking. We do not have this balance in our culture. It is viewed as weakness to be feminine by both men and women. Consequently, there is a competition to lead rather than follow, to speak rather than listen, to direct rather than be directed, to get to the point rather than expand consciousness and understand all of the diffuse, many ripples of patterns and ecology. When you look at ecology, an ant may be as important as a leopard in its impact ecologically on the forest, on nature. But when you look through the lens of culture, no one wants to be the ant. No one wants to honor the ant. It's cool to be the leopard. And what we have is a cult. That's what every culture is. It is a strong system of pain and pleasure, using social and political pressure to conform individuals within the parameters of the cult. Every cult has its laws, its taboos, and its way of punishing with shame, with judgment, with a lack of support, with a lack of belonging, with ostracization, with a lack of understanding, and most importantly, a lack of empathy. This is how a cult, a culture, maintains its status quo. And it does so at the expense of minorities and individuals. So, speaking from my own experience of going out into these places meditatively, with the benefit of substance, reconnecting with myself, reconnecting with deep ideals, seeing truth in self and in others in a much more balanced way. And coming back, I feel an enormous grief, an enormous ache that half of who I am is selling in this culture for 20 cents on the dollar. And when consciousness expands holistically, it expands into all of who we are, not just the part that the culture and the cult of culture sanctions. Now, as this happens, there's a couple of things that come into play simultaneously. Number one, increase and reconnection with the dissociated parts of the self. These are the parts that are shamed, denied, devalued, raped, molested, and traumatized by the culture in a lens that says it's not worth anything, so it doesn't matter how these parts of us feel. So the awareness under the influence of many psychedelic and mind-expanding practices and plants goes out, and the sense of I or ego starts to include not only the parts in the culture and in the cult that are blessed and overpriced, but also the parts that are cursed and undervalued. Now, this is no fault of the psychedelic, and it's no fault of the individual. It is a imbalance and thus dis-ease within a culture. Anytime you have an imbalance of any kind in a cult, you create stress, you create dis-ease. So when you create that imbalance with overvaluing some traits, now it gets particularly absurd when politics overwrites science. If you ask an engineer, would you rather have a plug or would you rather have an outlet to facilitate electricity? It's like, what are you talking about? You need both. Well, if you had to be one, if you had to be an outlet or a plug, which would you rather be? And it's like, one doesn't work without the other. You don't have electricity with a plug and no outlet. You don't have electricity with an outlet and no plug. You have flow when the two come together. And so from an engineering point of view, they're equal. And you get the most flow when there are enough plugs for every outlet and enough outlets for every plug. If you have 99 outlets and one plug, the other 99 outlets are useless. And yet culturally, and thus politically, everyone wants to occupy the position that the culture overbalances and overvalues. That's the masculine. Everyone wants to be the teacher, the director, the controller, the focused one, the active one, the externalized one. Everyone wants to have external results. Everyone wants to be smart rather than emotional. Everyone wants to get things done rather than expand consciousness. Everyone wants to tell someone what to do, or be helpful, or give something. But no one wants to be the recipient, the needy one. It doesn't make any sense. And yet, there are political, social, cult repercussions for breaking the taboo of the cult and actually moving into a greater state of balance, grace, and well-being. This is tension-producing because the social persona dies, stresses, has trauma with social shame. And yet the psyche dies when we overemphasize one part versus another. And so it's important to understand that consciousness expanding rituals of any kind in a sick culture, and sick is just unbalanced. Sick is dis-ease, and the more unbalanced a culture is, the more dis-ease there is. If you want to hold a 1-ton pole and you balance it just perfectly and you're standing there, a single person can hold a 1-ton pole in perfect vertical stance with a great deal of grace. A person can hold a 2-ton pole in perfect balance and grace. But as soon as that pole starts to get it unbalanced and get it like a 20 degree, a single person may not be able to hold it. And the more unbalanced, the harder it is, the more energy has to be expended to stop it crashing to the ground. This is where you get dis-ease, enormous stress, strains, misshaping the body to hold that weight in an imbalanced way. And we have a culture that is under extraordinary psychological stress to cope and sustain an extraordinary amount of unscientific imbalance that is biased towards the masculine in both men and women. Because you have the gender. That's not what we're talking about. Either gender can listen. Either gender can respond. Either gender can learn. Either gender can be open. Either gender can focus on being. But in Western culture, neither gender wants to be in the inferior position. And a psychedelic, a intuitive practice, a ritual, is going to move towards health for the individual, which is going to put us at odds with the cult. The cult that is not healthy, the cult that is not evolving in the same way, the cult that is actually banishing any rituals and experiences that would upset its status quo, its dis-ease. And this is very, very glaring. We have right now police officers driving around and telling homeless people living in their cars to move their cars, disrupting their sleep, looking out. And you can call a police and report a stolen item, very little will happen. You actually have police hurting their own citizens rather than doing anything helpful. You know, they're not, how can I help you get a home? What's the issue? Let's get you some support. No, it's move along. It's a very traumatic situation in just, you know, that among many, in many situations. So so here's the double whammy or the triple whammy that can present. One, Consciousness expands not only in the bright side, but allows us to see the depth of the wound. Because if the cult truly dissociates us from ourselves, then there is this part of our psyche that is in torture, that is in agony, that is in trauma, and it is not getting support. But we've dissociated from it. That's them. It's not us. So we tell ourselves we don't feel pain. It's not our pain. It's their pain. And it's not us. It's them. This is an illusion. It is us. Every human citizen, every citizen of a given country, every person in our community is us. And the degree of disenfranchised, shamed, unwelcome, uninvited people in a given community is the degree that the cult is abusing its authority to divide, to partition, to hurt its members, its community, rather than to heal, to love, and to integrate. That's the measure of a healthy culture. Denmark is one of the healthiest cultures that I've seen in that area. But there is still, within Denmark, the population on a physical level is in extraordinarily good shape. On an emotional level, there's not much survival issue, but there is still a partition, a banishing of intense emotion, which is a profoundly feminine state. Now, the beauty of a psychedelic, of a ritual of any kind that takes us back into our archaic days of unity, of embodiment, is coming back to ourselves. So as we go through this process, we're going to encounter the pain and the grief of what has been denied in us. We're going to encounter the pain and the grief of what we have denied and colluded to deny in ourselves. We are going to encounter the grief of how that feels. But now there's a new grief. As we start to pivot to include these parts of ourselves that are outside of the cult, the identifying with these unwelcome parts, these undervalued parts, will lead to a desire to have them respected and honored by others who are still following cult guidelines, who are still in the delusion that these parts are not included. And rather than honoring and growing and empathizing with these parts in us, they're going to continue to shame and attack and ignore and betray these parts of themselves. But we are now identifying, so it feels like they're betraying, denying us. And they are betraying and denying a part of us, a part of themselves. And they have the cultural blessing. This can create rage, helplessness, pain, anger, betrayal, hurt, bitterness, cynicism, pain. So this is one thing, and this pain will not be understood by most people. So it's a classic kind of lose-lose dynamic where you're angry, I'm angry. I'm angry that these parts are not being honored. But they're angry, the cult is angry, that I'm even wasting time talking about them. And in my world, the problem is that the culture is imbalanced. And in the cult's paradigm, the problem is that I'm being too sensitive, that I'm being too emotional, that I'm talking crazy, that I'm breaking the rules unnecessarily. It's like, what are you doing talking about cars and people driving out? Those are losers. I mean, give me a break. Get on. Let's make some money. Let's do this. Be normal. And so the rift actually grows. So whammy number one, we're opened up to feel the real pain that's going on and that we have participated in, hurting other people, hurting ourselves for decades. Whammy number one. Whammy number two, when we're looking for healing for that pain, the cult continues and increases its shame, blame, dissociation, judgment, and attack rather than empathizing and participating in the healing. That's whammy number two. Whammy number three comes when we look at the therapeutic model of the West, which is highly cerebral. Like, when is the last time you saw a therapist on TV, movie, in person, or heard about it? When you saw a therapist weep with the grief of what he or she is witnessing, the atrocity, the genocide of so many of the inner personas. A lot of the ancient mythology, that allowed not a monocrop of God and goddesses, not a monocrop of one, but many. India, the many, just temple of the rat, temple of the monkey, temple of the elephant, where there's many sacred elements and they're all have a voice rather than the one God. You're with us or you're against us. And this is part of feminine energy, because feminine energy is a sharing energy. Masculine energy, much more of a focused thing. It's all this, and none of that matters. Just get to the point is a real exclamation point around masculine energy. Hold it, all these feelings. Get to the point. In other words, take all these diffuse awarenesses, all these feelings, get rid of them, and just tell me in 5 seconds or less the one thing you want to end up with, and I'll deal with that, and I don't want anything else included. You look at our court system. Doesn't matter the person was beaten by their mother. Doesn't matter that the police officer abused them. Doesn't matter that this person is disabled, and all you have to focus on, members of the jury, is not is this right, not is this wrong, not how you feel, not what went on here, not what went on there. None of that matters. You have one decision. Did this person do you have reasonable cause to show that this person did this one thing which is against the law? And then we say justice is served. But you can't get more chauvinistic if you try. We're going to define what matters without including you. We're going to define the law, in many cases without including the individual. And we're going to decide what happens to the law without including you. And we're going to take the whole lifetime of patterns in which there are thousands and thousands of players that all influenced what actually ended up happening. And we're going to focus all of the responsibility for action and inaction on one person at one point in time, when the reality is much different. The reality, if someone punches someone, the reality is very different. If that person has been hurt in childhood and hurt again and just harassed by another person and this and that and the other. And none of that is counted in the law. Their pain level is going to continue to increase. And if no one takes a stand for them, if no one speaks out, if no one changes the culture that is continually increasing the pain, that pain is going to go outwards. And in some healthy ways, it should. So that the community feels the pain that the individual has been left to carry alone. But we're not going to pay any attention to this. And so we have this process, and it's the same, and it's the same in money. Do you or do you not have the rent money? I don't care about why. I don't care what you feel. I don't care about your trauma. I don't care about the laws. I don't care why you were fired. I don't care about any of that. I don't care if it's right or it's wrong, if you had good reason or bad reason. You deliver the rent on this date, at this time, at this amount, or you are thrown out in the street. Is this empathic or is this sociopathic? Well, obviously, if it has nothing to do with the person and their feelings and their situations, it's sociopathic. And this is a terrifying, traumatic situation. So we come to whammy number 3, which is that if you are dealing with traumatic memories that are resurfacing, a lifetime of pain and suffering that's coming to light, if while you're doing that, you are being shamed and re-traumatized for caring, you are going to be in a significantly, maybe 10 times, maybe 20 times more sensitive state. And you deal with therapists. If they respond, so first of all, do they have traumatic training? Second of all, do they have any psychedelic training? But thirdly, given that the laws are profoundly abusive to both therapists and clients, thirdly, you have a situation in which you need an incredible amount of love, of tenderness, of beauty, and it's not there. You don't need someone taking notes saying, done, whether you're done talking or not, see you next week, whether that's a good time frame or not. You need someone with you who understands and is not attuning themselves to money, to the culture's rhythms, to the culture's laws, but is attuning themselves to their own and to your rhythms, your laws, your sense of self and what's trying to come in. And most therapists, maybe 90% or more, are not going to be able to do it. And here's violence is simply a lack of attunement. Mental violence, physical violence, emotional violence. It's about the attunement between an individual and their consciousness and their environment. So if a therapist is working at this speed and you're needing to work at this speed, that's violence. If you are 1,000 times or 1,000%, 10 times more emotional than your therapist, it may actually highlight the gap. If you say, I just can't take it anymore, I feel so wrong doing this job, and your therapist patronizes you and says, everyone's doing it. What's wrong with you? No, you've got it wrong. Just keep on with your job, etc. and actually makes you the bad one, rather than going into that space and realizing that in this cult, in order to stay safe and have a home, millions of people are actively engaged in hostile activities, which are perfectly legal, and that there's no emphasis on how they're affecting, whether it's a negligent sales practice, a negligent doctor practice, where you can't even talk with your own patient, that this capitalist paradigm is hurting doctors, a variety of people, and you realize you're being hurt because you're being mandated to hurt others in a way that is not in alignment with who you are. But your therapist doesn't get it. They're numb. They're feeling into it through their head, and they're trying to look at what's normal and what isn't and help you get back to normal, rather than honoring that normal or not has nothing to do with health and balance. And so rather than having a champion that helps you to readjust your world, to be safer, etc., etc., you've got a puzzled person, and this is your last bastion of sanity. And they're in effect shaming you by not responding emotionally, by not caring, by implementing a protocol that has nothing to do with what you need. That's just the norm. This is what I do. I take some notes. I say anything else. Time's up. Write me a check. But that's not what I need. I need someone to cry with. I need someone to hold me. I need someone to be in a long day with me and just talk about the grief and let it come out in my time. I'm not pushing it to fit into your 50-minute slot. They're out of attunement, and it's violent. Here again, if you express anger about this, why are you doing this? You're charging me $150 an hour, and I'm feeling worse, and you're not getting it. You don't even know what health is. This isn't right. And then your therapist reacts or patronizes or says, take it or leave it, rather than responding, and now you're more isolated than ever. Now you're isolated from your community. You're isolated from the therapist. You have no respect for the cult that you've been raised in. And this is a real crisis, because this is when the protector personas start to shut down this new awakening and saying it's too dangerous. This is not a safe place. We have to shut down this growth, this awareness, these memories, so that we can fit in and not be attacked by everyone. Now you go into a battle with yourself, where the adaptive personas that are trying to avoid cultural trauma are actively suppressing the most beautiful parts of who we are, that's trying to emerge. And then this creates confusion and insanity, because you have to then dissociate from the most important parts of who we are. Now, we went through this trauma as children. Now it's happening again as an adult. And it is a terrifying, a devastating, a very painful moment. And the question is how to prepare. So one of these, I've talked about getting a dog. See, a dog is not part of the cult. So in many ways, it's more healthy than an acculturated human. Now, a shaman, their biggest job is to be outside the culture, outside the cult, and to meet you and honor you as you come in. But we don't have much of that shamanism here, and it's dying off. You know, if you go to Brazil and stuff, you know, it's you know, with alcoholism and stuff, we have a deficit of true shamanism and healing. Your own mind cannot be fully relied on to understand the griefs and going on. Your own mind may be participating in the abuse, So a dog, an animal, is outside of the cult and a strong ally for love and affection, because love and affection are the strongest protectors of what's growing. Love and affection. You can explore that, love and affection. Now, I think that's a very, very important tool. Most of all, a lover, someone who loves you and puts you first. That is not part of the cult. As an American man, I have failed to find that in America. But I have succeeded in finding it in parts and in pieces in Thailand and the Philippines, where the cult is different. There's more space for the feminine. There's more focus on the heart. And also, there's more space for individuality if it's outside their cult. So as a foreigner, I have a lot more license to, it's just kind of be polite to the foreigner, kind of under that umbrella. And this has been my salvation, on this journey. It's disrupted my relationship with therapists, and I have not been able to connect with Americans at this depth, the depth that can balm and heal this wound. And that's just my personal experience. But understand the threat and the possible crisis, and just know that other cultures, warmer cultures, more family-centered cultures, more feminine and more relationship-centered cultures. Guatemala is going to be better than the United States. Brazil, Vietnam, Thailand, Laos, places that have this family bond, it's exactly what's missing here. And I've been astounded to find, average, just decent people having 3 times the positive impact of the best paid therapists over here. And sometimes the whole timing paradigm is off. Sometimes you just need to be resting in the ocean, gentle waves, and with someone who loves you, who's kind, who's present, and who you can hold to stay centered in the present rather than getting lost in the grief of the past. So this is a crisis, and a couple of ways to respond. Deep community, preparing, maybe finding a community and learning who's going through this journey locally before doing it, so that you can share and build some alliances and friendship and go in gently. I think it's really worth it, because the challenge is to integrate. If you open up a wound and open up a beauty, but fail to integrate it because of the sociopathic nature of the environment, it can be worse. It can be worse than not opening up at all. It's like opening up a deep, pussy wound without having the protection to really clean it before repairing it. It's important to be ready. Good luck.